Hello and welcome to The Menu, Monocle Radio's food and drink programme. I'm your host, Chiara Rimella. Last year, The Menu travelled from Bhutan to Argentina and got a taste of anything from honey to chili oil. Today, we're looking back on some of the most delicious highlights of 2024. Coming up, we spotlight an impressive chef championing the fiery food of Malaysia.
Seeing all my family take care of me and just be there for me and feed me all these really incredible dishes and basically made me realise this is what I need to do. I need to learn these recipes and I need to take it back to London and show everyone what Malaysian food is.
Also in the programme, we revisit our interview with one of the world's most famous and respected chefs, René Redzepi, to talk about his documentary project.
The theme is love, that we fall in love with things as a people. And it's something that seasons our food and makes us happy.
Plus, we unpack the cultural significance of rye in Finland with our contributor extraordinaire, Petri Burtsov. All that here on The Menu on Monocle Radio. On this show, we speak to plenty of chefs, many of whom follow quite a formal route into training. For many of them, that means learning the intricacies of classic French and Italian cooking. For Abby Lee, that was the path into chefing at a high level, but when it came to finding a way to really express herself through food, she realised it was the dishes from her heritage that connected to her the most. At her restaurant Mambo in London, she cooks a punchy version of Malaysian food that stays true to the flavours of home while also making a confident and modern impression. Having started as a pop-up in the southern neighbourhood of Peckham, Mambo now has a bricks-and-mortar home in Clapton in the city's east. Here, Lee works at the open kitchen to deliver dishes that are about comfort, but with a kick. Earlier this year, she joined me in the studio to talk about how her career in food started and where it's going now.
I guess I had a very early introduction when I was really small, when I was still living in Singapore, where my family had a small bakery and my first memories were just watching my aunt bake bread, make cakes. I would then finish off the cakes for her, or I would have a stool by the till and cutting bread for customers to take away. And so I guess from then on, I knew I was going to be surrounded by food. Maybe not to this level that I sort of imagined before. But things got sort of put to a pause and, you just get on with school and life and then you move on to university, and I would think I was doing something that I wasn't really passionate about, and my mind, I just had to entertain myself and started cooking for myself as therapy, I wasn't feeling very good at that time, and baking, and I sort of realised this is something that can make me, get back into my body and just sort of feed my soul, and I think from then on I knew cooking would be the one path that I would take, just because it's physical and I could finally focus all my energy and just feel so in the flow, which I've never experienced before, and that's when I had to go and pursue it.
Do you still feel like that when you cook? Is that feeling still there? Despite the hecticness of service, is there part of you that still feels like it's a bit of a moment of going inside yourself when you cook?
Yeah, definitely. I think maybe there's a little bit more pressure now as the restaurant maybe gets a bit more famous, or there's a few more accolades or more people writing about you. Definitely before, if you're just in service for someone else, you're just in the flow. You're not thinking about, how this could reflect on you, or whereas now this is all the food of my culture, identity and everything. And so it can be a bit of a distracting sort of moments coming in.
There's lots riding on it. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned you now cook food that is connected to your heritage, because when you first went into cooking professionally, you were really into Italian food. How's that? Yeah. And what prompted the move eventually?
I guess when I began, we went to French cooking school, so just I thought that was the first, way into cooking, and from then on, there was a little Italian section, sort of month, and I fell in love into making pastas and I guess that was linked to baking as well. And I just liked the approach of how Italians were cooking, and I guess became obsessed. And also really loved the produce in Italy, and I had this whole romantic vision of it.
But is there something from that time and from the approach of Italian food and the, I guess, attention to ingredients that has stayed with you and has informed the version of Malaysian food that you cook right now?
I mean, I definitely think so. That those were the most formative years of training. It was just drilled in to me of, whether it was I was at a really busy bistro, doing lots of covers an evening, just trying to bash out the food, or in the Michelin star kitchen, where everything was basically a piece of art, and perhaps not so much on how yummy the food is. It was more like the visual elements. And so that sort of ingrained in me that combination of, I love the visual side of plating of food and how the colours and everything could, work together and how you could present it to a customer, but also just remembering it's just got to taste just really rich and good, and it's got to feel good when it enters your body and all those senses.
At what point did you realise that you wanted to change the kind of food that you were cooking? What led you to actually leaning into cooking Malaysian food?
So we did a first pop-up in Shoreditch, and that was just 2 months before COVID. We hired all these people and team and basically had to let everyone go. And I think that time was just like a horrible, I think it was definitely at the bottom of my, not hit rock bottom, but nearly there. And basically went home to recover from that. And that was the first time I really realised the food I grew up with was giving me a sense of comfort, and I never really looked twice at that food. I just took it for granted. Yeah, that was the first time I noticed it and basically realised, what was I doing? What was I making? I was at that pop-up, I was sort of trying to fuse Italian and maybe a bit of Asian flavours, but, I just didn't really know what my voice was. And getting home, just watching my aunt prepare these dishes for me, and just take care of me, just seeing all my family take care of me and just be there for me and feed me all these really incredible dishes. Yeah, that really shook me and basically made me realise this is what I need to do. I need to learn these recipes. I need to take it back to London and show everyone what Malaysian food is.
So did you not know how to cook the food when you approached it? You grew up with it, you ate it, but did you have any knowledge of the recipes?
Not at all. I couldn't believe that. I had no idea how any of it was made. It was basically like I had to learn how to cook from scratch again. Just watching them start these, even it could be a simple kerabu, which is like a Malaysian salad, or curries or soups. Yeah, just it was all new to me. Did not know how to balance all those ingredients as well. I guess as I started taking down the recipes, because none of it was written down, and I thought, okay, this is time to video you and, write it down. And yeah, I was like a child again, watching my family.
So did you learn everything from your family? Does this mean that there is a particular sense of connection to heritage in the food that you cook?
Yeah, it's very personal. Maybe sometimes too personal because, you feel like it represents you. So maybe you could take it personally if someone doesn't like that certain dish, which, you just have to shake it off. It's not you. But half of the menus will usually be very personal recipes learned from mainly my aunt, who's basically absorbed all the recipes from my grandmother. So she's like the vessel. And so I'm just mainly inspired by her and take all my advice from her.
That was Abby Lee speaking to me in the studio at Midori House. This is The Menu. Chef René Redzepi has shaped what the world understands as fine dining today, to the point that his name is sometimes used as a byword for experimental cuisine in popular culture. He has pushed the boundaries of what it means to cook at the highest level. He has defied expectations by deciding to shut down his hallowed restaurant Noma in Copenhagen at the height of its success, and this year he took another surprising career turn by releasing a documentary about food, Omnivore. Each of the episodes in the series hones in on one specific ingredient, from bananas to salt, trying not only to explain their history, but also how their production is threatened by climate change. This show's producer Monica Lillis sat down with René and executive producer Matt Golding to find out more.
Matt and René, it's such a pleasure to have you here on the menu. I wanted to start at the very beginning and ask you about the title of the documentary, Omnivore. What made you land on that?
many hours of meetings and incredible amounts of paper with incredible amounts of names on there from... I can't remember I feel like we've had just about any name you can imagine. For some reason, it feels it was almost the most difficult part of making this show was coming up with a name that we all could agree on. That's how I remember it.
It was. I mean, I can remember having reams of paper here in Noma of just hundreds of names. And we ended up with omnivorous at first. And that was kind of what we were going with for a little while. And then we just shortened it to omnivore. And I think omnivore ultimately, of course, it's who we are, right? We eat a little bit of this, we eat a little bit of that. It's a wide open menu. We're not here to cover one specific corner of the food world as much as we are to really explore all of its breadth and beauty.
And Matt, the documentary is so beautifully shot, and you've, of course, worked on plenty of other food television, most notably with the late Anthony Bourdain. What made you decide to choose a documentary series for this project, and why is visual storytelling so important when it comes to food?
I mean, I think when you look at food television, obviously it's come an incredibly long way over the last 20 years, and people like Anthony Bourdain did an incredible amount of work in sort of showing the world that food is more than food, right? I think he did a really special job in particular when it came to food and politics and food and culture. But when René came and called me up and said, hey, would you be interested in working together? It was a dream, because what René has always done so well in his cooking and at Noma and his relationship with food is tying it right back to the natural world. And that meant, I think, one of the first pieces of inspiration that René shared with me was Planet Earth. What if we took the scope and the scale and the sense of wonder and awe that you feel when you watch David Attenborough do his thing in a nature documentary like that, but we applied it to food? What could we do with that? And I think ultimately what we tried to do with Omnivore was tell both these big, wide, broad stories with, the kind of the gorgeous visual storytelling that you can do in the world of documentary, as well as these very specific, intimate tales. And so we'd have episodes where we traveled tens of thousands of kilometers around the world, like Chile, where we moved from René's childhood in Macedonia to Louisiana to Bangkok and back to Copenhagen. And then we have episodes like Pig, where we just live in one small village in central Spain. I think it's those textures, it's that way to kind of twist the aperture of the camera, so to speak, so that you don't fall into a formula, that you use every episode as an opportunity for a different style of storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the listener who won't have watched the series yet, it's split into 8 episodes with ingredients as titles. So coffee, banana, chili, salt, tuna, pig, rice and corn. Why these ingredients in particular?
Well, we had a list of, I think we have a list still of more than 100 ingredients through which we could have made this show. And at first, perhaps there was a few more big world-altering staples on there, like we could have had potatoes on there as well, for instance. But we quickly saw that if we were to do that, we're worried that the stories would be too similar. We'd needed a range of stories and to have all the different concepts for each episode be loose and not terribly tied to one another. So, for instance, you can have Chile, which is an ingredient, unlike corn or rice, that hasn't changed the fate of nations, or that doesn't offer any giant caloric value in a daily life. It's a love story that we have. And so that, is a theme for our episodes, and probably will be if we ever get to do a season 2. The theme is love, that we fall in love with things as a people, and it's something that seasons our food and makes us happy, and so that's kind of how we chose it. Once we really start diving into it, how do we build these stories properly? How do we, Matt always said, make the concept album where each tune is like different to one another, and at the end of it you've really been somewhere, you've explored and you felt something.
So that brings me nicely on to my next question. Because these ingredients are very much all universally used, albeit in very different ways, what do you think this says about human nature, and how do these ingredients end up bringing us together?
I think one of the most remarkable parts of the story of food is to watch how these ingredients have traveled from their birthplace, right? Ultimately, every one of these ingredients started somewhere as a wild food, and over centuries and millennia have been transformed by us. Ultimately, a pig is in a way a human recipe. Corn in a way is a human recipe. We have chosen and selected and bred and crossbred these ingredients into more efficient, more delicious expressions of themselves. And so when you watch something move from the jungles of South America, like Chile, and make its way across to Portugal, into the Iberian Peninsula, and from there to India and to the Far East, and suddenly become a part of not just the cuisine of places like Thailand, but the culinary fabric, the cultural fabric, I should say. You see really quickly how there are these universal elements that tether us together. Our desire for something, for an exclamation point in our lives, in the case of chili, that's something that we're seeing more and more as the world gets spicier and spicier. That 20 years ago, it was probably really hard to find these chilies in Denmark. Not a particularly spicy cuisine here in Denmark. But today, we grew the ghost peppers that are in the episode for chili in the Noma greenhouse.
The Boot Orange Copenhagen.
That's right.
In that sense, food is wondrous, and it's amazing because in many ways, if we fall in love with an ingredient, most likely we mess it up. We eat it into extinction, or we start breeding it in ways that are, because we need so much of it, it needs to be as cheap as possible. And so we create these systems that are not really super healthy, but they do provide calories and work, but it could be better. But at the same time, we also have so many similarities. When wheat finds its way to all corners of earth, we make flatbreads, all of us, sometimes unbeknownst to one another. We ran into flour, and there's maybe not a million, but perhaps there's hundreds of variations of flatbreads from northern Sweden, near the Arctic Circle, to Mexico, northern Mexico, and everywhere in between. So food has that. One of the concepts is also that we should remind people through watching this show that you and I are the same, and we eat the same, and we want the same, which is to be happy and to explore things and to enjoy, and we look and go about it in different ways. And we need to perhaps make food be that place where we meet.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the variation in size and scale of production in the series. 1 minute you're in Kerala on a small family banana farm, and the next you're in the heart of banana production in Colombia. What was it like to hear those stories?
To me, obviously, I spend my life in food. It's no surprise. The only thing that surprised me was how rapidly people, like a small banana farm in Kerala, how hard they have it. Here's a family that works for diversity, for quality, for everything that should be cherished and prized, yet he's struggling, they're struggling. And it's the same all over the world. It doesn't matter if you're growing asparagus in northern Copenhagen or you're that banana farmer. I'm sure it's the same in England if you're trying to do quality and you're trying to sort of tell people, hey, let's eat better, let's make sure to remember seasonality and this and that, you sort of get punished for it financially, and that was, to me, wow, okay, they are rapidly disappearing all around. We see that, and all around they're the same. They're so incredibly, wildly crazy about what they're doing with no real financial reward in sight. It's like they're missionaries for the banana or for the asparagus or for whatever, It's unbelievable to watch them. We should know more about them.
I mean, I think that's exactly what we set out to do, right? I think we're used to watching food television where we see the end product, we see the cooking itself, we see the restaurant meal, or we see the recipe tailored for the home cook, but we don't see this incredible food chain that is, I think, one of the most remarkable expressions of our humanity, how we collaborate across vast expanses of the globe and do really complex acts of participation to make food what it is, to make it available, to make it abundant, to move it about the planet. It's a remarkable thing. And the scale, I think you hit it on the head. We wanted to do both the biggest, widest possible look at how monoculture, monocrops are grown, at the same time as looking at the flip side of that. What do we lose when we eat just one kind of banana? What are we missing out on? And how does that affect both human culture as well as the natural world?
That was Renee Redzepi and Matt Golding speaking to Monica Lillis. Next, we couldn't end our best-of episode without a stop-off in Finland. Here, rye has long been a staple in local diets. The grain has been cultivated for over 2 millennia, and today, chefs continue to experiment with the ingredient in kitchens up and down the country. This spring, our Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsov met with local chef Tom Hansen and food writer Iman Garagodzlu to discover why Finns love rye so much and why the crop holds such cultural significance in the nation.
The Finns' love affair with rye goes back a long way, 2,500 years at least. Rye gained popularity after the locals discovered that it was much easier to cultivate in the harsh northern climate than other crops such as wheat or barley. In addition to being easy to grow, Finns soon discovered that dishes such as rye bread and rye porridge were high in fiber, healthy, and provided long-lasting energy for the people toiling away on the fields and in the forests. Fast forward 25 centuries and surprisingly little has changed. Finns still eat a lot of rye, over 13 kilos per year to be exact. That's per person. In 2017, when Finland celebrated 100 years of independence, rye bread was voted Finland's national dish. And when Finns move abroad, and here I speak very much from personal experience, the first thing that they ask their friends and families to send over to them is, you guessed it, rye bread. To understand what explains Finland's enduring love affair with rye and how it can be used in cooking, I joined the co-founder and chef Tom Hansen from one of Helsinki's most loved neighborhood bistros, Kuurna. I began by asking Hansen about how rye is used in Kuurna's ambitious cooking.
In our bread baskets, we have a very classic rye cracker that we've been serving ever since the Kuurnas started. The mother for the rye cracker has been given by another famous chef to the previous owners, and the story goes that it's over 100 years old. And so we've been just using that, and every time we make the new dough, we always use the old dough as a mother, and we continue it like that. And then obviously a very big way that we use it is as a flavor element. It's very unique as to be used as a flavor element. So whenever we want to kind of change some aspect, if we're doing a kind of dish that's maybe based in another cuisine, then we might use rye, for instance, as a flavoring agent to make it more our style. So, for instance, one thing that we've done for many years as well is we take a very classic Finnish fish, the vendis, and we've done like a vendis tempura. But instead of having just a very straightforward wheat flour tempura batter, we use rye in it to create a more Finnish aspect.
Despite being traditionally used in simple countryside cooking, Hansen is convinced that rye lends itself for use in more ambitious restaurant kitchens too. To showcase what rye can do, Hansen wanted to prepare a burbot soup that he also serves at the restaurant.
Sour rye starter as a flavoring agent for this soup. So using it as a thickener. In French cooking, normally we do a roux, which is butter and flour to thicken soups. So we've taken a sour rye starter and basically just running it into the soup as a flavoring agent, but also as a thickener.
So this is the part where you add the rye mother into the soup stock, right?
Exactly, and now I'm just going to cook it out for about 5-10 minutes. Similar way that if you add a little bit of flour or anything into soup bases, you need to cook it out. Otherwise, it starts to stick to the bottom of your mouth. So, yeah. Now I'm just going to fry the fish. First, I'm going to fry the liver.
As Hansen continued to fry the burbot, we were joined by Iman Karagoslu, an Iranian-born chef and food writer based in Helsinki. I had invited Karagoslu to join us because I wanted to hear how he, as an immigrant to Finland, sees the country's love affair with rye.
Well, I am Iman Mansurotola Karagoslu. I'm originally from Tehran, Iran. I've lived most of my life in Finland, but before that in China, in Beijing, and before that in Pakistan, Islamabad and Karachi. My family is Persian, so rye wasn't in our house. Even though I was brought up in Finland and ate Finnish school food, but it didn't live with us in the house. So rye was something exotic from the beginning till today. I think in our house, Lena is the one who craves for rye bread time to time, and I like it as well. But yeah, at the beginning, when at this school we had different kinds of bread, rye vita, kind of like dry bread, and then jälkiuuni, which is quite sour, really hard. Kind of like, why the hell anybody wants to eat a hard bread like this? I can't even bite it. And then you have reikaleipä, which is really nice when it's fresh and when butter melts on it, and it's one of the most delicious breads ever.
Why do you think, Iman, what explains Finn's love affair with rye?
Well, I think there are things that you grow up with, but you have to grow up with certain things. Rye has this sourness, groundiness to it, which I think there's a comfort into it. It's a comfort food. I make sour bread time to time, and every time I want to bring that sourness to it, I use rye flour, and that makes it totally delicious. It brings the sourness of sourdough to its best.
As Hansen continued preparing the burbot soup, a smell of butter, garlic and fried fish filled the kitchen. I decided to ask him what advice he would give to those listeners who would like to experiment cooking with rye.
Well, I think in any baked goods, basically, it can be used as a flavoring agent. I think what Imam was saying about using a little bit of rye in bread, it immediately creates some more depth, more acidic flavor into it. So I think that's anything that you're baking, try to throw a splash of rye in and see how it tastes.
So Tom, what's happening now?
All right, so I've got the soup ready. Potatoes are cooked and the carrots are cooked. So now I'm just going to assemble the dish. Usually I start with putting in the liquids first, and then after that I start to put all the rest of the ingredients in.
Thanks, Petri. And that's all for this edition of The Menu. Remember that we are back with a brand new episode again on Friday at 2000 London time. That's at midday in San Francisco. Also, don't forget to tune into our spin-off show Food Neighborhoods for a tour of some of the world's tastiest destinations. I am Chiara Rimella. This program was produced by Monica Lillis and our sound engineer was Flint Simons. Thanks for listening, and until next week.